100,000 people work at the Trade Center. Many of them may be scared, but fire officials say that even with the problems that exist, fiction couldn't become fact.
Saying that we can't have serious fires, and we have had serious fires. We consider this a serious fire, but we would not have I do not think that it's highly likely that we would have a fire similar to the one that they portrayed in the Towering Inferno.
Even without a sprinkling system, fire department officials and building officials here say that there's no chance the World Trade Center could become a type of towering inferno.
There have been many days in history that have changed the world. World War I and II, the Vietnam War, the assassination of high-profile figures, and many other events that took millions of people's lives onto a new path some way or another. September the 11th, 2001 was one of those days. In order to get a full overview of the devastation, things need to be taken back about a month before the event. But before I begin, know that I will be talking about the most widespread information we have on the plan and attack, and we'll be discussing in depth the alleged conspiracies that have gone unanswered in a separate documentary. Rest in peace to all those innocent people who lost their lives that day, and as a result of the war that followed. The former United States President George W. Bush is enjoying a vacation with his family in Crawford, Texas. Just 5 days before, the CIA had warned him in a memo that bin Laden was planning a terror attack in the US, possibly in California and New York City. Little did he know, trained Al-Qaeda recruits have settled in America after obtaining visas. The memo was not acted on, and the threat of an attack by Al-Qaeda was not discussed any further. Mohammed Atta, along with 2 other Al-Qaeda recruits, have a planning meeting in Las Vegas, and 23-year-old Marwan al-Shahai purchases 2 4-inch pocket knives from a sports shop in Florida. The FBI, who had been investigating Zakari Moussaoui after the flight school in Minnesota he was attending became suspicious of him, is arrested and charged with an immigration violation. A deportation order is signed as FBI agents seek permission to search his computer. They suspect he is linked to Al-Qaeda, and a concerned FBI agent, Harry Samit, sends a memo to Washington, saying he suspects Moussaoui is conspiring to commit a terrorist act. Incredibly, the memo is not read, and a search warrant is denied. Meanwhile, the 19 hijackers who are to commit the 9/11 attack are ramping up their physical fitness, with many of them enrolling in gyms in order to be strong enough to overpower the flight crew. After several warnings from CIA counter-terrorism chief Kofa Black that an attack is imminent, security in the US is also slightly ramped up. Meanwhile, the hijackers that will take over American Airlines Flight 77 check into the Valencia Motel in Maryland, just a few miles from the National Security Administration offices. The terrorist pilots continue with their flight training, and despite suspicion from flight instructors about their unusual behaviour, nothing more is acted on. One of the terrorists, Fayez Bani Hamed, has a large deposit made into his bank account in preparation to purchase plane tickets. FBI agents are furious that they have not been informed by the CIA that 2 known Al-Qaeda members, Khalid al-Mitar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, had entered America in January 2000. Despite now having this information, they begin a non-urgent search for the 2 men, and they are put on the FBI's terror watch list. Meanwhile, the hijackers had set a date for September the 11th and started purchasing airline tickets. Ringleader Mohammed Atta travels to Washington and has a final planning meeting with American Airlines Flight 77 hijack team in the Valencia Hotel. He later purchases a utility toolkit containing a large knife which he will go on to use to overpower passengers and crew on American Airlines Flight 11. By the end of August, the hijackers are making final preparations for their death, closing bank accounts, ending leases on their accommodation, and sending any spare money to various Al-Qaeda accounts. All one-way airline tickets have been obtained, and the hijackers are now using cash only. The 4 hijack pilots have now also completed test flights and obtained FAA pilot licenses. It was around this time senior security officials voiced concerns that they think the previously arrested Zakari Moussaoui was planning to hijack a 747 aircraft, but no further warnings were given. Abdulaziz al-Omari and Satam al-Squami, two of the AA Flight 11 hijackers, check in at the Park Inn in Boston. United Airlines Flight 93 hijackers fly in from Florida to check in at the Marriott Hotel in Newark Airport, in preparation to board their planned flight to San Francisco on September the 11th. The terrorist leaders, including Ziad Jarrah and Mohammed Atta, meet up for a meal in the food factory in Maryland before Atta flies to Boston, where he meets up with fellow United Airlines Flight 175 hijacker Marwan al-Sheli. The 5 American Airlines Flight 77 hijackers cook and eat a meal in the kitchenette in their Maryland motel. Just 2 days before 9/11, the New York Times publishes an article on their website examining the threat of an Al-Qaeda attack on the United States. The article focuses on a videotape made by bin Laden, which was released in June 2001. This article was quickly removed after the 9/11 attack. 24 hours before the attacks, there seems to have been a last-minute change of plan. Mohammed Atta is caught on CCTV with Abdulaziz al-Omari in a South Portland gas station, and later in a Pizza Hut en route to Portland, Maine, where the next day they catch a connecting flight to Boston at 6 a.m. This is not thought to be the original plans and may have been done to stagger the hijackers' arrival at Boston's Logan Airport. Meanwhile, over in Washington, the National Security Agency have intercepted a conversation between 2 suspected Al-Qaeda terrorists. One says the match begins tomorrow, and the other says tomorrow is 0 day. These conversations were not translated until September the 12th. Before this day would end, Ziad Jarrah writes and sends a farewell letter to his girlfriend in Germany. At 7:59 a.m, American Flight 11 takes off from Boston Logan Airport, traveling to Los Angeles. There are 92 crew and passengers on board the Boeing 767. Just 15 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 takes off from Boston, also en route to Los Angeles, with 65 people on board. 20 minutes after takeoff, flight attendants on board Flight 11 radio ground staff and say the plane has been hijacked, and the FBI are immediately notified. At 8:20, American Airlines Flight 77 takes off from Dulles Airport en route to LA with 64 people on board. 4 minutes later, hijacker Mohammed Atta can be heard on a transmission from Flight 11 to ground control.
We have some planes, just stay quiet and you'll be okay. We're heading to the airport.
American 11, are you trying to call?
Nobody move. Everything is okay. If you try to make any move, you'll injure yourself and the airplane. Let's stay quiet.
In response, the Northeast Air Defense scrambled 2 fighter planes to tail the aircraft. At 8:41, delayed by 41 minutes, United Airlines Flight 93 with 44 people on board takes off from Newark Airport, this time heading for San Francisco. Just 5 minutes later, Mohammed Atta steers Flight 11 into floors 93 and 99 of the North Tower of the World Trade Center in downtown Manhattan. Within seconds, the NYPD and FDNY are dispatched. President George W. Bush is also informed. At 9:02, occupants of the World Trade Center North Tower are ordered to evacuate, and 1 minute after the evacuation order, Flight 175 flies into floors 75 and 85 of the South Tower. By 9:24, the entire world is hearing about what has happened. Meanwhile, the passengers on Flight 77 manage to alert family members on the ground of a possible hijack. At 9:37, Flight 77 crashes into the western facade of the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. 5 minutes later, for the first time in history, all flights flying over the United States are diverted or grounded, and the White House and all other high-profile buildings and landmarks are evacuated. Meanwhile, the brave firefighters are making their way up the towers. Fire chiefs are struggling to keep track of their men, as many firefighters are not checking in and heading straight to the scene, and many have not been called but are rushing to help. By this time, 45-year-old Oreo Joseph Palmer, one of the first to arrive at the South Tower, had fixed an elevator and took it to floor 41, before running up 37 flights of stairs with 50+ pounds of equipment on, to reach floor 78, the South Tower's impact zone. There he met Fire Marshal Ronald Paul Bucher, and they were both the only firefighters to make it to the South Tower's impact zone. They helped and comforted the workers who were stuck up there, and provided information to the firemen below. Then at 9:59, the South Tower of the World Trade Center, the second to be hit, collapses. 200 miles away, passengers aboard Flight 93 have become aware of the other hijacking and attempt to overcome the hijackers of the plane. In response to this takeover, the hijackers deliberately crash the plane into a field in Pennsylvania, killing all 40 passengers and crew. Shortly after, at 10:28, the North Tower collapses in the same manner as the South Tower, and just under 7 hours later, the nearby 47-story 7 World Trade Center also collapses. Immediately after the event, no one had a clue of how many lives were lost. Many firefighters' emergency alarms that are designed to go off 30 seconds after a firefighter is motionless, indicating he is down, could be heard, and people were running away from the huge cloud of smoke and debris that the 2 towers collapsing had caused. It would only later be calculated that 2,996 people were killed. 2,753 of those were at the World Trade Center sites. The other fatalities were 125 at the Pentagon and 40 from Flight 93, which crashed into the field in Pennsylvania. The victims were aged from 2 to 85 years old, and up to 80% of the victims were male. The collapse of the Twin Towers caused such devastation that of the 2,996 killed, only 1,640 victims have been positively identified. 4 months later, the fire at Ground Zero had only just been extinguished, and it was around this time that a video was released showing Osama bin Laden taking responsibility for the 9/11 attacks. He and his terrorist group Al-Qaeda became a household name, and he became the most wanted man on the planet. In the wake of the attacks, the United States targeted the Taliban in Afghanistan, and Al-Qaeda lost their support and was no longer able to use the country as a safe haven, quickly losing its status as a credible and stable terrorist organization. However, despite America's initial success in Afghanistan, it was the beginning of the longest and one of the most controversial wars in US history, as they tried to stop the return of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, and locate Osama bin Laden, which resulted in the loss of many military lives. Eventually, in 2011, Osama was found in a secure compound in Pakistan where he was shot dead.
Good evening. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children.
That was 10 years after the devastating attack on the United States, which was a truly tragic event with a loss of life that is incomprehensible. The sheer amount of outpouring grief across the world was unprecedented, and the emotional impact caused by the attacks was overwhelming. I cannot even begin to comprehend the grief and heartbreak of the family and friends who lost a loved one on that day, and cannot express my admiration for the people of New York City and beyond, who came together in the aftermath of one of the most tragic attacks in history.